"Where?" he said, and his voice was remarkable, steady and cold even now, even bleeding out on a gurney in a trauma bay. "Is the surgeon?" "Unavailable at present, Commander." "I'm unavailable." He said the word like it tasted wrong. "I'm a 2-star officer, and the best this hospital has for me is unavailable." "Sir, your pressure is." "Is there no official surgeon?" he said, louder now, loud enough to carry across the bay, loud enough that the residents finally looked up, "that I could give my life to in this damn hospital, and not the nurse standing before me?" The room held its breath. Jessica Melanson did not flinch. She had been talked to like that before, in places considerably less forgiving than this one. "Commander," she said, voice level, "you either allow me to do my job and stabilize your heart and keep you alive until the head surgeon gets here, or you spend the next 4 minutes making speeches, and I spend the next 4 minutes watching your pressure bottom out." She picked up a fresh dressing. "Your call. But make it fast." Something moved across Reed's face. Not respect, not yet, but something close to recognition. Like a man who'd heard that tone before and knew exactly what it meant. He didn't speak again. She took that as consent and got to work. If you're ready to enjoy this story, I humbly request you like and click subscribe. Also let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now back to the story. The night Commander Desmond Reed was wheeled through the trauma bay doors, the air inside Valor General Military Medical Center changed. Not in the way it usually did when a critical came in, not the sharp, practiced urgency of trained hands moving in sync. This was different. This was the kind of stillness that falls over a room when people suddenly remember how much they have to lose. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Reed arrived, before his blood pressure tanked and his heart decided it was done negotiating, there was already a crisis brewing at the center. One that had nothing to do with any patient. The PA system crackled at 21:47 hours with 2 words that turned the overnight shift to ice. Code black. Jessica Melanson heard it from the supply corridor, where she was restocking trauma kits with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark. She paused, latex-gloved hands hovering over a row of 4 bags, and let the announcement settle over her like a cold wave. Code black meant mass casualties inbound. It also meant all senior surgical personnel were to report to their stations immediately. She finished stacking the kits. Then she pulled off her gloves, folded them neatly, and walked toward the trauma floor. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered man named Lieutenant Brewer, was already barking into a radio when she came through the double doors. His face carried the particular tension of someone doing math they didn't like the answer to. 3 attending surgeons were listed on that night's rotation. One was already elbow-deep in a bowel resection in or 2 and couldn't be pulled. One had called out at 1800 with a confirmed flu. And the third, Dr. Halden, chief of trauma surgery, the man whose name was on every critical intake protocol, the man the entire overnight staff organized itself around, was not answering his phone. "Anyone reach Halden?" Brewer demanded. Silence. "Someone tell me they reached Halden." More silence, dressed up as busyness. Jessica moved to the central monitoring station and pulled up the incoming patient manifest. For casualties from a convoy accident on the base perimeter road. Blunt force trauma, 2 with suspected internal bleeding, 1 unconscious. Standard chaos. The kind she could navigate in her sleep. She was reviewing triage priorities when the second radio call came in, the one that changed everything. A single Humvee. Unscheduled. Inbound at high speed. VIP patient. Rank 07. Condition critical. Rear Admiral's office calling ahead. Do not let him die. Jessica looked up from the monitor. Around her, the room had gone very, very quiet again. She recognized the quiet. She'd heard it before, in a different kind of theater, under a different kind of pressure. It was the sound of people deciding whether to be brave or whether to be careful. She set down the manifest, straightened her badge, and waited. Because Jessica Melanson had never once in her career at Valor General done anything to draw attention to herself. She filled shifts. She filed reports on time. She remembered every patient's name and none of her supervisor's birthdays. She was by every visible measure the kind of nurse who showed up and disappeared, competent, quiet, unremarkable. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. The trauma bay doors blew open, and the plan died. They came through the doors fast, 2 base MPs running alongside the gurney, a corpsman at the head end, and a 4th figure in a blood-soaked field jacket jogging alongside with 2 fingers pressed hard against the patient's neck like he could hold the pulse in by sheer force of will. The gurney wheels screamed against the tile. On it, stripped of rank but unmistakable to anyone who'd spent more than a week in that building, was Commander Desmond Reed. He was not unconscious. That was the first thing Jessica registered. His eyes were open, sharp and furious even through the gray pallor of a man losing blood faster than his body could argue about it. His jaw was set. His right hand was clamped over his own abdomen where a field compression dressing had already soaked through twice. The second thing she registered was that not one doctor had moved to intercept him. Brewer was on the radio again. 2 of the junior residents, both of them, had found reasons to be looking somewhere else. The intern near the door had literally taken a half-step backward. Jessica walked forward. She reached the gurney before it stopped moving, peeling back the soaked dressing with practiced speed, eyes cataloging what she saw in the same flat, clinical way she cataloged everything. Penetrating abdominal trauma, lower right quadrant. Probable hepatic involvement, given the bleed rate. Blood pressure dropping. The corpsman was calling out numbers, and none of them were friendly. Pulse thready. Respiratory rate compensating, but not for long. Reed's eyes found her immediately. They were the kind of eyes that had spent decades deciding who was worth their attention. They moved across her scrubs, her badge, her face, and she watched the calculation happen in real time. "Where?" he said, and his voice was remarkable, steady and cold even now, even bleeding out on a gurney in a trauma bay. "Is the surgeon?" "Unavailable at present, Commander." "I'm unavailable." He said the word like it tasted wrong. "I'm a 2-star officer and the best this hospital has for me is unavailable." "Sir, your pressure is." "Is there no official surgeon?" he said, louder now, loud enough to carry across the bay, loud enough that the residents finally looked up, "that I could give my life to in this damn hospital, and not the nurse standing before me?" The room held its breath. Jessica Melanson did not flinch. She had been talked to like that before, in places considerably less forgiving than this one. "Commander," she said, voice level, "you either allow me to do my job and stabilize your heart and keep you alive until the head surgeon gets here, or you spend the next 4 minutes making speeches, and I spend the next 4 minutes watching your pressure bottom out." She picked up a fresh dressing. "Your call. But make it fast." Something moved across Reed's face. Not respect, not yet, but something close to recognition. Like a man who'd heard that tone before and knew exactly what it meant. He didn't speak again. She took that as consent and got to work. From the corner of the bay, she felt it, the sideways glances, the careful repositioning of colleagues who wanted to be close enough to watch, but far enough to be blameless. Brewer caught her eye once and gave her a look she knew well. "Stand down, Melanson. This is above your pay grade. Don't make this harder than it already is." She had spent 3 years at Valor General learning to read those looks, learning to respond to them with a small nod, a step back, a retreat into function. She was the nurse who restocked the supply kits at 2147. She was the one who remembered the patients' names. She was not the one who stepped into the breach when senior staff hesitated. That was the agreement, unspoken but understood. And she had honored it. Every shift. Every time. She looked at Brewer. She looked at the residents. She looked at the corpsman still pressing uselessly against a dressing that had given up entirely. Then she looked at Reed, whose blood pressure the monitor was now announcing with the urgency of someone reading a countdown. She made her decision in the time it takes to exhale. "Clear the station," she said. Not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. "I need a thoracic tray, 2 large-bore IVs, Oneg on a pressure bag, and someone get me an ultrasound at bedside, now." Brewer, call or 3 and tell them I need it open in 5 minutes." She was already moving, already snapping gloves on, her voice carrying the particular gravity of someone who had given orders in rooms where the cost of hesitation was measured in bodies. Nobody moved for exactly 2 seconds. Then everybody moved. Or, 3 was cold, the way operating rooms always were, kept deliberately below comfort, so the staff stayed sharp and the bacteria stayed reluctant. Jessica had been in this room dozens of times in a support role. She had never stood at the table the way she stood now, with the overhead light angled directly onto a field that belonged to her. Reed was sedated but unstable. The anesthesiologist, a quiet, competent woman named Dr. Park who had simply appeared when summoned and asked no questions, kept her eyes on the monitors and her hands steady. The scrub nurse beside Jessica was young and visibly terrified, but her hands were ready. "Talk me through what you're seeing," Jessica said to no one in particular, because saying it aloud was the discipline, was the training, was the 10,000 hours of a different kind of medicine waking up in her nervous system. She examined the ultrasound image. Hepatic laceration, grade 2, maybe 3. Bleeding controlled for now by the body's own pressure mechanisms, but that equilibrium was fragile. The moment his pressure corrected without internal repair, the bleed would accelerate. She needed to pack, drain, and stabilize. By time. Not fix, that wasn't the mission. The mission was to make sure there was still a patient alive when Halden walked through that door. Her hands moved. Not the careful, deferential hands she used on the floor. Different hands. Hands that remembered pressure and darkness, and the specific silence of a helicopter at altitude when someone's life was measured in minutes and there was no one else. Hands that had been trained in a curriculum that was never entered into any file at Valor General. She packed the laceration with the efficiency of someone who had done field surgery in conditions that would give the residents nightmares for a year. She managed the drain placement with a precision that made the anesthesiologist look up once, quietly, over her mask. She kept her breathing even. She kept her voice low and instructional, for the scrub nurse, yes, but also for herself. Narrating the work was the anchor. The anchor kept you present. Reed's pressure began to climb. Slowly, then steadily. The monitor's tone shifted from urgent to merely serious. "There you are," she said softly, to him, or to herself, or to some older version of both of them in a different theater entirely. His pressure held. She stepped back, finally, and let herself breathe. He came out of sedation 40 minutes later, in the recovery suite, with the particular alertness of a man whose body had narrowly lost an argument with mortality and whose mind had already filed an appeal. Jessica was charting at the workstation by the window when she heard the change in his breathing, the shift from medicated depth to waking consciousness, and turned. Reed looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You're still here," he said. "Someone has to be." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the monitoring equipment, then to his own hands, then back to her with the expression of a man doing inventory. "The bleeding," he said. "Packed and drained. You're stable. Halden will close properly when he arrives." Another silence, the kind with weight in it. "I've had trauma care on 3 continents," Reed said slowly. FOB surgeons, ship surgeons, a Danish combat medic in a ditch outside Kandahar who worked on me with a headlamp and a prayer. His eyes hadn't left her face. "I know what field medicine feels like." "That," he paused, something shifting behind his eyes. "What you did in there. That wasn't nursing school." Jessica said nothing. "Where?" Reed said, and the question was quiet now, stripped of the earlier aggression, carrying something different entirely. Did a nurse learn to move like a Tier 1 operator? The room was very still. She set down her chart. She held his gaze for a moment. This man who commanded rooms, who had deployed to places that still didn't have names on unclassified maps, who had spent a career surrounded by people who earned their credibility in the field. Then, without a word, she reached down and pushed her left sleeve up past the elbow. The tattoo was not decorative. It was not the kind of ink people got to remember a feeling or mark a milestone. It was small and precise and positioned on the inside of the forearm, where it would be hidden by a sleeve or a glove. The way people wore things they didn't need the world to see, because the people who mattered already knew. Reed saw it and went completely still. A specific symbol. A specific unit. The kind that didn't appear on any public roster. His eyes moved from the ink to her face, and something in his expression underwent a fundamental rearrangement. "Special Operations Combat Medic," she said. "Attached to the 75th, then seconded to a joint task force that officially doesn't exist. 2 deployments to the Korengal. 1 to a place I still can't name in a room that isn't SIFT." She pulled her sleeve back down with the same economy of movement. She did everything. "I separated 4 years ago. Came here. Kept my head down." Reed stared at her for a long time. "Why?" he said finally. "Why stay quiet? With that background you could have." "I know what I could have," she said simply. "I chose what I wanted." She picked up her chart again. "You were in Korengal in 17, Reed said. Not a question. His voice had changed entirely. "3rd quarter. The medevac that got grounded during the dust storm. 3 Kia, 2 critical, 1, he stopped. His jaw tightened. 1 officer who should not have survived his injuries. Jessica said nothing. "That was you," he said. She met his eyes. And just for a moment, just one, something moved across her face that wasn't clinical or composed or careful. Something that had been packed away for 4 years in a supply corridor at 2147, restocking kits in the quiet. "Get some rest, Commander," she said. "Halden will be here within the hour." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Melanson." She stopped but didn't turn. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, the way soldiers did, and walked out. Dr. Halden arrived at 2352, still pulling his coat on, hair uncombed, with the face of a man who had been rehearsing apologies and catastrophe plans in the car the entire drive over. He came through the trauma bay doors fast, scanning the room with the practiced dread of someone expecting the worst. Brewer met him at the threshold. "What's the status?" Halden asked. "The commander, tell me he's..." "Stable," Brewer said. Halden blinked. "What?" "Stable. Packed and drained. Pressure's been holding for 40 minutes. He's in recovery." Halden looked at the board. 3 had a procedure logged. He looked at the timestamp, then at the name in the operator field. He looked at it for a long moment. "Melanson," he read. "Jessica Melanson." "Yes, sir." "She's a..." "Yes, sir." He walked slowly to the 3 window and looked through the glass at the cleaned-up field, the organized equipment, the work that had been done. His expression moved through several phases. Disbelief, then a kind of professional assessment, then something that looked very much like humility. "Where is she?" he asked. "Recovery suite. Charting." He stood there another moment. Then he straightened, the way people did when they were adjusting to a new understanding of something they thought they already knew. "Pull her file," he said quietly. "Her full file. Whatever's in it." Brewer almost said there isn't much in it. But he remembered the way she'd moved tonight, the way the room had reorganized itself around her voice, the way Reed's numbers had climbed under her hands when everyone else had taken a step back. "Yes, sir," he said instead. Down the hall, through the window of the recovery suite, Jessica Melanson sat in a pool of fluorescent light, writing her notes in the careful, precise handwriting of someone who had always known that the details mattered. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She already knew the file wouldn't be thin for much longer. It happened the way things happened in institutions, slowly, then all at once. The official review took 11 days. The panel included Halden, the chief of medical staff, a liaison from the base commander's office, and, added at his own specific request, in a move that sent a quiet shock through the administrative chain, Commander Desmond Reed himself, still healing, sitting at the table in his service uniform with his undivided attention directed at a single folder. Jessica sat across from them in her scrubs, the way she had sat through every shift, every handover, every ordinary day for 3 years. She had not dressed differently. She had not prepared a statement. They read her file aloud. the parts of it that could be read aloud. They asked questions she answered in the same level voice she had used in or 3. When they reached the Karengal record, the medevac, the dust storm, the officer with unsurvivable injuries who had survived, Reed said nothing. He just looked at her steadily, and she looked back. At the end of it, Dr. Halden said, "We're recommending immediate reclassification of your role with a formal elevation to clinical leadership, and a formal apology from this institution for 3 years of underutilization." He paused. "That last part was my addition." Jessica looked at him. "Accepted," she said. 3 weeks later, the unit she had served with, the one that officially didn't exist, sent a representative to Valor General. Not with ceremony, not with speeches. Just a man in civilian clothes who walked into her office, placed a folded coin on her desk, and said 4 words. "We didn't forget you." She turned the coin over in her fingers. The weight of it was familiar. The specific gravity of being known by the people who knew what the knowing cost. She set it on the corner of her desk where she could see it. Not hidden, not displayed, simply present. She opened her patient files and went back to work, but not from the shadows this time. From the center of the room, where she had always belonged, in the place she had quietly refused to claim until a bleeding commander on a gurney at 2147 made the question impossible to sidestep. Jessica Melanson had never needed the world to see her. But she had never, not once, been invisible. It had just taken the right crisis and the wrong man to underestimate her, for the rest of the room to finally catch up. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, do subscribe to our channel because your support keeps the team going, and stick with us because we have many more where this came from. More intriguing and more amazing stories as you can ever imagine. So do check it out and enjoy.